Good afternoon, one and all. This is the Board Natural and Cultural Resources Committee meeting of the East Bay Regional Park District's Board, November 16, 2022, and we're beginning at 12:38. We had some technical issues. Sorry for the delay. The chair of this committee, Beverly Lane, is currently out of state, so Director Rosario is sitting in for her this afternoon. Thank you, Director Rosario. And Sabrina, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Director Coffey. Director Rosario.
Here.
Director Corbett.
Here.
And Committee Chair Coffey.
Here.
And I also want to make a mention that Acting Assistant General Manager Lisa Gorgian is present, as well as the Chief of Stewardship, Matt Grawl.
And staff that will be presenting today include, Sabrina?
Yes, ecologist Tammy Lim, Dr. Susan E. Townsend from Wildlife Ecology and Consulting, rangeland specialist Allison Rope.
Okay, then let me mention that today's meeting is held virtually pursuant to the Brown Act as amended by AB 361. Board members and staff and public may participate in person, via phone, and video conferencing. We are also providing live audio and video streaming and have provided the public the opportunity to email or call in prior to the meeting for public comment or to fill out a speaker card and come to the meeting in person. All information regarding participation in this meeting can be found on the agenda on the district website as well, ebparks.org. After each presentation, we will take public comment. Are there any questions from my colleagues on this procedure? Seeing none, we'll move to the agenda. Our first item is wildlife biodiversity and trends in abundance, monitoring post-fire in East Bay. And that's going to be Tammy Lim and Dr. Susan Townsend from Wildlife Ecology and Consulting. Tell us a bit about your firm.
Hello, Chair Coffey, Director Corbett, and Director Rosario. I'm Tammy Lim. I'm an ecologist in the Stewardship Department, and thanks for this opportunity to present today. In the fall of 2020, the SCU Lightning Complex fire burned over 370,000 acres, including almost 5,000 acres of EPRBD lands within the Sunol and Ohlone Wilderness and Morgan Territory and Round Valley Regional Preserves. Soon after the SCU fire stopped burning, Stewardship took the lead on planning for post-fire repair and monitoring needs. This included monitoring how vegetation communities responded, where and how to repair livestock infrastructure, and tracking wildlife response in burned landscapes. To help us monitor wildlife response to wildfire, we collaborated with Dr. Susan Townsend, a mammologist who's been using non-invasive techniques like camera traps for decades in study sites from California to Mongolia. Not only is this research aligned with California's 30 by 30 initiative, monitoring wildlife response to wildfire informs our management practices and helps us prepare for future fires. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Susan Townsend.
Hi, my name is Susan Townsend, and I'm very happy to be here to be presenting on wildlife biodiversity and trends in abundance, monitoring post-fire in the East Bay. I'd like to acknowledge Tammy Lim, this was her idea, and Lizzie Etzen from Golden Gate Conservancy, and my colleagues at Conservation Metrics who did the analysis for the bird data. So why monitor? Monitoring is part of good management. You cannot manage what you don't measure. Landscape level monitoring helps us to understand if the ecosystem is healthy, if the ecosystem is resilient to external perturbations, and how the wildlife populations are doing. Are they stable, thriving, or collapsing? Landscape level monitoring provides critical information for resource managers, academic researchers, and the general public. And it also can help facilitate communication between these three groups. The metrics collected by landscape level implementation of camera trapping, and in this case, audio moz, establish baseline occupancy estimates for a suite of representative species to assess ecosystem health. We can monitor trends in biodiversity, the abundance of key species, and the community composition as indicators of long-term viability of ecosystem integrity. Long-term monitoring of the top trophic levels helps us assess the impacts of climate change, in this case, wildfire. This provides needed information for metrics for nature check. It also helps fulfill establishing baseline assessments of California's biodiversity for the California Executive Order N8220. It also helps beat some of the goals for Newsom administration's 30 by 30 partnership. And finally, helps inform biodiversity metrics as set out in the Convention of Biological Diversity. So what does this mean? It helps us answer questions like how is the bobcat population doing, but it also provides information on how restoration projects affect wildlife. And in this case, how does wildfire affect wildlife abundance? And also, how does the East Bay Regional Park District lands contribute to the overall resiliency of our wildlife in the Bay region? So I want to just talk about some basic ecological concepts. What is ecosystem health? It's when all or most of the expected species occur on the landscape. It's when these species are able to find food, mates, and shelter, able to have and raise those young into adulthood, and that those young are able to disperse to other suitable habitat. And then what is resilience? Resilience is the ability of wildlife to rebound from perturbations, that is, disturbances both natural and human caused. So when you have a healthy ecosystem combined with connectivity, you can have a resilient ecosystem. And this allows source populations shown by the blue areas can then disperse into other areas if those things are taken out of, are not useful for wildlife, for things like wildfire, for example. So I'm a big proponent of seasonal analysis because this allows us to understand how the landscape is functioning for wildlife. So for example, in the spring, animals are finding mates and giving birth. In the summer, the young are growing. In the fall, animals are dispersing. And in the winter, they need to find adequate food and shelter. Okay, so pretty soon after the wildfires in late 2020, we wanted to establish a post-fire monitoring to measure these recent fires' impacts to wildlife. We wanted to capture immediate and long-term effects on wildlife presence, diversity, and abundance. And we wanted to use protocols consistent with other regional efforts measuring biodiversity. This includes OneTAM's Marin Wildlife Picture Index project, a project down in Santa Cruz on the San Vicente Redwoods with POST. We're also collaborating with Kendall Calhoun from UC Berkeley and Lindsay Rich from the CDFW. So our efforts, so we decided to focus on these areas around Round Valley, Morgan Territory, and Los Vaqueros watershed. The habitat there is mostly grazed non-native grasslands and oak woodlands. We wanted to include burned and unburned areas. This is a half-kilometer grid. The yellow dots here show our unburned area. The red perimeter shows the burned areas. And we set up 20 paired sensor in each of the strata, and that consisted of camera traps and audio moths. So our monitoring tools consisted of the audio moth and camera trap that we would strap to a stake. The audio moths are about the size of your hand, and they record sound files. The camera traps are triggered by motion and heat differential, and they're excellent for monitoring terrestrial mammals. So why terrestrial mammals? Terrestrial mammals are indicators of ecosystem productivity. They're energetically very expensive. They can be reliably detected by cameras. And in general, we don't really understand which shy nocturnal species are present unless we use these types of non-invasive monitoring tools. We also were interested in birds and bats. And birds and bats can indicate ecosystem productivity and habitat heterogeneity. So we had our visual targets and our acoustic targets. Our acoustic targets for this project have been birds and bats. However, we're also collecting acoustic data on amphibians, insects, and human-related noises and other mammals. So we're hoping to analyze that data at a later date. So the camera setup and maintenance and audio setup and maintenance occurs 4 times a year. The cameras were unbaited. They were set up within 100 meters of designated coordinate, and this settings for both the camera and the audio mods are standardized. We are collecting biodiversity measures, detection rates, and single season occupancy estimates. I want to talk a little bit about data management after we come out of the field. The cameras generate a lot of images, so we're using the Wildlife Insights cloud-based camera trapping software, which is an end-to-end data management, and it has built-in image recognition software. And then those images are reviewed by humans. The software itself is a great repository for camera trapping data, and it helps us download and share our information. To date, we've loaded over 850,000 images, of which approximately 90,000 have been identified as wildlife, and this represents about 20,000 sampling days. To date, we've reviewed over 500,000 of these images. We've got our year 1 completed. Today, I'm going to be presenting interim results from winter and spring for the camera traps, and then the audio mods, and then acoustic monitoring. And this is information or data that we were able to analyze earlier in the year because we haven't been able to process this full year yet. So as far as the acoustic surveys, to give you an idea of how much data is generated from these efforts, from one season, we had over 4,324 hours of data. And from that, we had 63,000 sound files. These sound files are then run through something called BirdNet, which is out of Cornell. And it takes these sounds and it categorizes them by species. However, these files also need to be reviewed by people. Once we've done that, then we can actually use this as data to analyze. So this is data from winter of 2021, which was the first season for which we had data after the fires. And it spans actually from December 1st through February 28th. And birds and humans are not our target. However, we do get a lot of really beautiful bird pictures, a lot of different species, and also we can look at different human categories as well. So from this one season, the mammal diversity actually indicated that there were more species. So we had 14 species overall. The red indicates non-native species. A 1 indicates that we did detect it, and ND indicates that we did not detect it. So we had 12 species detected in the burned and 9 species in the unburned areas. So, okay, so here are some graphs showing our occupancy data. I'm not going to get into the weeds on this, but I do want to show you some overall patterns that we're seeing. Occupancy is measured from 0 to 1. The closer the number gets to 1, the more prevalent and abundant the species is on the landscape. And then down here, we have our species. So here we have our small mammals. Our small mammals are our rabbits, our mice, and our squirrels, of which we have 3 or 4 species. The pink is burned and the yellow is unburned. So in this case, with the small mammals, we can see this is for the first season after the burn, that we actually have different species of small mammals in the burned and unburned areas. For our two large ungulates, which is the mule deer and the wild boar, or wild pig, we had maybe slightly elevated numbers in the burned areas. And here are our mesocarnivores, our middle-sized carnivores. And this include the raccoon, striped skunk, gray fox, coyote, and bobcat. And both the gray fox and the bobcat were using the burned areas more than the unburned areas. And here we've got a spring of 2021. Here are two large ungulates. And as you can see, they were more prevalent in the unburned area, in the burned area versus the unburned area. And again, very similar, higher use in the burned areas than the unburned areas. And there could be a number of reasons for this. This was in the spring, and there's likely more resources in those areas. And this is preliminary. So for our birds, when we look at occupancy, these are a lot of our common bird species like woodpecker, kestrel, scrub jay, towhee, goldfinch, and so forth. And we really didn't see much difference between the burned and unburned areas in terms of occupancy. The overall occupancy fell in the fall, but this is because birds tend to be less active in the fall versus the spring and summer. This is just an anomaly. This is an error. There's probably very few great horned owls actually detected. It's just, just ignore that. However, if we include the rare species with our common species, we are seeing higher richness in the summer of 2021 of the bird species shown here. And then by another measure of biodiversity, we saw higher diversity in the unburned area in the fall. Okay, I'm going to briefly talk about bats. We actually use a different type of acoustic monitor. It's called a Pedersen D500X, and they're set for 1 to 2 weeks out on each strata, 5 hours a night. These are our two sites as an example. And from this data, we can see that there were less, so this graph is showing the number of species of bats that could occur in this region. And in the spring, we had fewer species detected than in the burned area than the unburned area. And then in the summer, we had more species detected in the burned versus the unburned area. And the call rates in terms of activity levels, we had a higher rate of calls for the Mexican free-tailed bat in the unburned area. But then for our 3 common species, we had higher activity rates in the summer. Okay, so what is this showing us? So what we're seeing so far is that some mammals seem to be preferring the burned areas, particularly in the spring. The common species may not be showing preferences between the burned and unburned areas, and the bird richness was greater in the burned area in the summer, and then that sort of was reversed in the fall. And finally, bats are exhibiting seasonal differences in using the burned and unburned sites. So this approach gives us plenty of information and it helps us assess management changes, recreational impacts, and natural fluctuations. But in this case, we were really focused on the effects of wildfire. So with that, I would like to acknowledge Becky Tudin, provided lots of support, Carrie Richardson from CCWD giving us permission, and then lots of folks who have really helped out with this project. That's Chris Lyle and Tammy Lim, and our mascot, Baby Yoda. This is my colleagues at Conservation Metrics. And with that, I will be happy to take some questions.
Thank you. Could you tell us a little about your consulting firm?
You're looking at my consulting firm. It's a sole proprietor. I've just been.
So wildlife ecology and consulting is you.
Is me.
That's great. Okay.
Yeah, and I've been, yes, working in this region for about 25 years now. So.
basically as in colleges?
Yeah. And a
Interesting.
consultant. I do the normal wildlife ecology consulting.
Okay. To my colleagues, Director Corbett, any comments or questions?
Sorry, but somebody is cutting a tree down right next to my house. So can you hear that?
Yeah,
Okay. Maybe I'll wait till after Dee speaks, because maybe it'll
All right.
quiet down. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. It's fabulous. I think this is an incredible resource that you provided. Thank you. But it seems like the overall, from what my take is that overall fire is beneficial. And I think we could probably use this as a start of justifying prescription burns. And so, I mean, it looked pretty strong to me that
Yeah, and I not to interrupt, but I have colleagues who are finding similar up in Hopland. They're finding a similar thing because I thought that seemed a little bit too. You don't usually get results like that in science, but anyways, he was finding the exact same. This is Kendall Calhoun, so he's also finding similar results. So
great. Yeah, I think the data speaks for itself, and I think this is a good basis for making decisions and for policy in the future. So thank you very much.
you're welcome.
Very thorough.
Ellen?
I hope you'll be able to hear me. I guess one of the questions I have is, in the information that you put together, what's the most important for us taking care of the wildlife in our parks?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part of your question.
So what is the most, in having this data and learning about the items, what time of year they grow, they're doing well and all that.
Yeah.
What's important about this information that we have?
Well, I think some things that popped out to me is understanding basically how long after a fire, maybe some of the changes in the landscapes are beneficial for some trophic levels, but not other trophic levels. So for example, the small mammals may not want to be in a place that's just been burned with no cover, whereas the larger ungulates and the mesocarnivores may be attracted to that area. So by understanding how wildlife are shifting their patterns of use depending on where the wildfire is, it gives us a sense of what wildlife are able to utilize the burned areas versus the unburned areas. And then the other thing I'm super interested in is how long after the burn do we start to see things equalize? Or are there things that are permanently changed over time with which wildlife are using the burned areas, if that makes sense? It's kind of like latency to recovery. So then we can put a time stamp on, okay, in about a year, this is going to start looking like the rest of the landscape. And it's really only in the first 2 seasons or something. So, I mean, so we can start to get a sense of that. And then the other thing is that there may be permanent changes in occupancy for certain wildlife. So I think these are all really helpful ways that we can understand how parts of our landscape burn and how it functions in the overall picture. And is that a long-term effect or a very short-term effect?
And so I'm assuming, obviously, this information teaches us some lessons on how we should take care of our land. And what would that be? What would it encourage in how we take care of wildlife in our open space areas?
Well, and not just to repeat what I said, but I do think that if we understand how burned areas may have long-term beneficial effects for certain species, then we can understand that that would be a treatment that you could do to enhance wildlife or, wildlife habitat values. But the other thing is, I think we also have to look at the severity of the fires and what habitats they're in, because so I'm also doing work down in Santa Cruz, and I'm working in an area where there was an extremely severe burn. And it does seem like there may be, at a certain point, the severity of the burn may take parts of the landscape out of commission for a longer period of time for, let's say, like the puma. I mean, I'm not saying that's what we found, but those are the types of patterns we're starting to see, just some real shifts in what animals are able to utilize those areas. And for example, there used to be a lot of wood rat nests there, and now there are none. And that is likely going to have some very long-term effects for particularly the mesocarnivores. So those are just two examples. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and how should we best use this information to help encourage the health and, the
Well, I think Director Rosario was sort of hinting at this, which is there may be instances where prescribed fires may help us more quickly meet our management goals than if we didn't burn. And particularly, I think if we see some long-term benefits, it may need to be controlled burns may actually be something that needs to be built in to land management, which I think it is to some degree. So
Yes, thank you. I have another question. If it doesn't make any sense to answer this question, that's fine. But just in general, we have the land that we hold open. And then of course there's land next door that may be owned by someone else, maybe more of a park area, whatever. Are there ways we can work with neighboring property management folks that help protect species that live in an area? I know obviously you're talking about certain types, but is there a way we can work together with neighboring areas? Obviously we have a lot of land where we can do good things to protect wildlife, but is there other ways to partner with communities?
yeah, I mean, I tend to stick with my wildlife ecology, but I do think the contiguous landowners are a really important component to just the health of the ecosystems in the Bay Area. And I think when the East Bay Regional Park District can demonstrate that they're serving as these source populations and trying to understand how those areas are linked, and then, maybe working with the partner groups and just saying, hey, we've got a healthy population here and healthy population here, let's look at the fencing, let's look at the connectivity, what can we do is to work together, just to basically allow the animals to at least safely be able to move from one piece of land to the other. That's just a thought. Does that?
Are we doing
address-
any? Are we doing any of that?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
This is shifting away from animals and wildlife.
Yes. my mind is on a different type of use that's not what you're looking at specifically, but I'm always concerned about the land near the shorelines and how that impacts the endangered species that might be next door to somebody else's property does too, but how do those communities work together to protect those species? So you don't have to answer what I just said there.
Well, Chief of Stewardship, Matt Grawl, Director Corbett, it's a really good question. It's something we're certainly looking at, and the nature check study that we've done really helped kind of develop some more of those relationships and get a lot of the baseline data that we can use to inform some more of these decisions. We have done some partnering and work in coordination in the past on treating invasive weeds at times with partners on these adjacent properties, but I think more and more we're wanting to look at more wildlife corridors, as Sue described, and trying to determine opportunities for this collaboration. The same thing with the 30 by 30 initiative. I think as we're putting out different projects, we're starting to talk to partners and other agencies about these cooperative land management practices. So data like this and data like the nature tech study are really helping us inform opportunities for partnership is how I'd respond.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful information that you have shared with us. It's really teaching us some important information. Yes.
Director Rosario.
Follow-up question.
Oh, sure.
Is there are we correlating the recovery of vegetation along with the looking at the recovery of or absence of wildlife as well?
I know there were some vegetation plots, but I don't know the current status, but Tammy may.
Yeah, Tammy Lim, Stewardship Department. We are looking at the vegetation recovery as well. And there are some randomized plots in different vegetation communities, and that study is ongoing and concurrent with this one.
Great.
But we won't have a specific correlation study correlating it to wildlife, but that study is ongoing. And then we will also have vegetation mapping occurring.
Great. Yeah, I would think there's got to be,
Yeah, I mean, I think we could at least map them together and see
Yeah.
if there's
yeah.
what's happening.
Uh-huh.
And it is pretty stunning to see, particularly the grasslands seem to they sort of seem to be recovering
Yeah.
pretty fast. So,
Cool.
all right. Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you for letting me present.
Matt, it would seem to me that we are sharing this study and similar studies in informing how we jointly manage our parklands with, say, the East County Habitat Conservancy. So I think there should naturally be a lot of partnership sharing of this kind of information. That's correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And there's
Yes,
also,
that's correct.
and there's also other communities that might not have the same sort of idea of big open space parks, but they may have open space, which is parkland for children. And I mean, I really think we should start looking at how we, what happens with our next door neighbors too, and what we can do to encourage support of, our natural species, neighbor to neighbor. You know what
Sure.
I mean?
Sure.
Okay.
Doctor, unfortunately, there have been some fairly intense and large wildfires in this state over the last several years.
Yeah.
So I might presume that similar studies are being done in
Yeah.
those areas up
Yeah.
north.
So Hopland it's interesting. Half their land's burned. So it was good experimental opportunity. We actually had a bunch of paired sensors. I had down in Santa Cruz, and then they burned down and we just reset everything up. So we'll have a before and after on that. We do know just anecdotally though, that we even have some of these on our cameras that didn't burn, that, animals do get injured and do die in these wildfires. And so depending on its severity and size and all this other stuff, I suspect there's, I think at first people were saying, oh, they can run away and stuff, but now I think there's pretty strong evidence that they can really hit an area. So I think we're just sorting that out in terms of the role of severity. But
We're going to learn a lot about the post effects on populations, the fire
Yes.
effects on
Yes.
populations of these critters.
yes, very much so. And we will have comparison areas for sure.
But, that's in addition to just studying the effects on habitat. And so what I'm suggesting is there'll be a lot of this similar data coming in from all over the state, and experts like yourself will be developing consensus on post-fire management issues.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I think that's right.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned during your presentation, and a couple of slides went by quickly, partners in this study in the one we're doing out in Round Valley, and I saw UC. Could you describe those partnerships?
Yeah, so actually when we initiated the study, I've already been involved in the One Tam Marin Wildlife Picture Index project. So those are landscape level camera trapping projects. And it started out really looking at trends in biodiversity and some of the things that I spoke of. But pretty quickly after we started that project, there had been these major burns elsewhere. And so we started to realize this was like a really nice control set of data. And then there's the San Vicente Redwoods project that I just mentioned in Santa Cruz. So we had some methodologies, but we wanted to make sure that our data collection was consistent with other big landscape level projects. So Lindsay Rich from California Department of Wildlife, she's heading up the statewide biodiversity monitoring program, and they're collecting very similar types of data. And then Kendall Calhoun from Brashear's lab at the UC Berkeley, he's up at Hopland, and they also have a bunch of non-invasive sensors on the landscape.
What lab at Berkeley?
Brashear's, Justin Brashear's. He focuses on biodiversity. So we wanted to make sure that, I would say, collecting apples and apples, right? So we're collecting the type of data that we can do these meta-analyses where everything's sort of, we're not doing exactly the same thing, but we're able to actually compare these findings sort of reliably, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So we had several meetings to collaborate, look at the protocols, and build the way we're collecting data and analyzing it too.
All right. And there's a grad student involved?
So Kendall Calhoun is a grad student, and he's working at up at Hopland, which is a UC Berkeley extension area near Mendocino. But he's in the Brashear's lab at UC Berkeley.
Okay. Interesting. I'm always intrigued by those connections that this park
Yes.
district has.
Yes.
Yeah, Alan.
I was just wondering, will it be possible to get copies of the information that you shared with us, the written information that you shared with us?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I'd love to have that to be able to look at it even more closely. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt or Lisa, any closing thoughts? Ready to move on? That was very interesting, and thank you for the presentation, Tammy and Dr.
I
Townsend.
just say in closing, we appreciate your interest and enthusiasm for this work. And I think we also find it very interesting and exciting in stewardship. And just I think a lot of the questions really got to a lot of the things we're trying to answer as far as what are these future management implications. I think it certainly it shows the importance of understanding where we should be doing controlled burns and how we can enhance the ecology through doing that. And there's certainly a need for more partnerships. So I think all the discussion and questions are right in alignment with the way we're wanting to utilize this information and do more studies like this and help inform future management. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it strikes me that the Native Americans seem to know this stuff intuitively from their stewardship of these lands.
Right. They certainly knew a lot.
And
And
we're relearning.
Right.
We're relearning this.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing this
Thanks.
to the committee.
Yeah. Thank you.
We'll move to item 3, grazing program, 3 years of challenges and accomplishments.
So since I'm still standing up here, Matt Grawl, Chief of Stewardship, just give a brief introduction. So Allison did this great presentation. We had our grazing dinner a little over a month ago and talked about some of the things we were doing. And so Lisa and I really enjoyed that presentation and thought it would just be really informative to bring it to the committee to just talk about more of the great work that Dina and Allison have been doing to focus some of our projects in the grazing program and just improve our overall management of our rangelands.
Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, Chair Coffey and members of the board. Allison Rowe, Rangeland Specialist for the Park District. And like Matt said, I'm going to share the presentation that I gave at the grazing dinner, but it will be modified. All right. All right. So just launching in, let's see, I'm trying to. There we are. Just give an overview of where our grazed acres are in the park. About 70% of the park district is grazed under our program. It's about 86,000 acres, and it will continue to grow with time and with more land acquisitions. It expands across 37 parks. Currently, we have 42 grazing tenants and 73 grazing licenses. And everything that's in the orange polygons our grazing unit. So as you can see, it's mostly concentrated in our central and eastern parts of the county, and less so and along the parklands. And we've all experienced a pandemic recently and still continue to do so. And with the historical visitations at the parks, it really put a lot of burden on our grazing operations. With more people, we had more maintenance in general with fences and just gates and increase in animal incidences. But, you know, we persevered and learned how to navigate, and our tenants learned how to navigate and deal with the increase in visitations. And I know it was a lot for us, and we all really appreciate having the parks open. So, but one way that we learned to communicate with their tenants as well is, you know, we weren't able to meet for our annual grazing dinner was through a newsletter. So starting in spring of 2021, we created the Ruminant Reader, which is a biannual newsletter for our tenants to just, you know, inform them about policy updates, reminders of submitting their stocking reports, and just sharing information and resources. And we will continue to do this.
What is ruminant? I have to admit.
Like
some ignorance.
rumination, like of the rumen, like ruminant, like a ruminant animal, like an ungulate.
Keep going.
So a cow.
A cow, okay.
A cow is a ruminant animal.
All right, that
Yeah.
got it. Now I know.
And they're digesting over the material. So
I just don't know the science of cows, sorry. The biology of cows.
yes.
Did someone help out this guy?
Yes, that actually occurred in Briones, and she was, yes,
She?
helped out. Mhm. We also experienced, you know, wildfires. As Sue was just, you know, explaining with the research that they're doing in these burned areas, we had the CSU Lightning Complex fire, which burned 7,000 acres. It affected the grazing operations at Morgan Territory, Ohlone Wilderness, and Round Valley. And we're still recovering from those impacts. Not hundreds, but in our properties, we had miles of fence that was damaged. And it was still being replaced 2 years later. In 2021 and 2022, we had the Kirker Pass fires, which is along, well, on your way to Pittsburgh. And that burned about 90 acres, which affected fencing, restoration with the HCP, and pipeline and water. And it burned in the same place twice during 2 different years. So that's kind of been an ongoing problem. And then recently we had the 2022 scenic fire, which was along the Carquinez shoreline, which burned 120 acres. And that burned all the northern perimeter fencing. And we don't really know when we're going to be able to reintroduce grazing to that park until, you know, we come up with a plan for eucalyptus removal and things of that nature. We also have experienced drought. 2021 was an exceptional drought year, and we received fractions of the precipitation that we would normally receive. That was a huge impact on all of our resources, but also the grazing. And in this year, and maybe this stat isn't current anymore because we had rain in October, but it is still interesting that the first 9 months of this year for both Contra Costa and Alameda County, it was the #1 driest year on record in terms of the amount of precipitation we have received. We also experienced record-breaking heat waves, which impacted the livestock. And I'm for sure the wildlife as well. And we saw ponds and springs dry up for the first time in Park District history. And that's according to, communications with our grazing tenants and with park staff. So during the drought, we had every tenant submit a drought contingency plan. We required animal reductions on all of our properties. And then in those places where there was forage but no water, we did provide emergency water deliveries and infrastructure to help them get through the drought. And moving on, so despite all those challenges, we continued with our planning on how to make improvements and focus on the grazing program. And the number one way that we really do that is by updating and adding new livestock infrastructure on our parklands. So that would be, new fencing, fence replacement, corrals, water projects with tanks and troughs, spring rehabilitation, and pond restoration. So in 2021, we did about $330,000 worth of work. And this year, we're estimated to do almost $1 million worth of work. We've did 20 projects roughly in 2022, and we're up to 60 this year. And as you can see, those cost share totals are the money that is brought in through our grazing tenants in the form of cost share with federal agencies and state agencies. And I'll get into that a little bit later. Now, this number does not include permit fees, biomonitoring, or direct payments. These are really larger projects. And so there's a lot of planning before I delve into our more notable projects that we've done over the past couple of years. I just want to give a shout out to everybody that's involved, because the grazing program, we do pull in a lot of people before we implement projects, and that would be park operations, that would be other department staff, whether that's DECO or MAST, or, well, I don't really actually work with MAST that often, I'll take that back, but GIS or planning, and our grazing tenants, and also these outside agencies like the Natural Resources Conservation Service, our local conservation districts. And these are just some photos of us out in the field, planning. And we love it. So I'll start with our Crockett Hills pond restoration project that we completed this year. This was actually completed in October of 2022. We actually did 5 restoration projects this year, pond restoration projects. And this one is what we referred to in the top pasture. I'm sorry, I might get a little detailed in some of this. And that top pasture actually has no water in it except for this pond. And on the left-hand side, you'll see the pond prior to cleaning, and on the right, you'll see it post-clean. So we took out sediment, and it had a failed embankment and spillway, so we repaired the embankment and spillway. Now, this was an NRCS project with our tenant, Bill Granados. And as you can see, we have a lovely new berm and spillway and a clean pond that actually had water in it once we got to the native soil. We also have done some water projects there. This is kind of a Google Earth of what we refer to as the middle pasture. Last year, we hooked up to an existing well and supplied a new trough in the middle pasture. And then this year, we continued that water system from the existing trough to a new corral. So we actually decommissioned an old corral and a trough that were actually located in the intersection of 4 trails and next to our riparian area. and we moved the corral out into the open field, and we put water in that new corral. And we also relocated the other trough as well, so it wasn't next to the trails. So a combination with the developments that we've done in the middle pasture and the top pasture actually will help us with the rotation and actually removing those animals in the winter time for the mountain biking activities. So, we're trying to make these improvements. It does take time, but the overall goal is, to have a rotation that's compatible with trail use, specifically for mountain biking. And that's Bill right there. He calls me kid. He's funny. We also had a really large water project at Thurgood Marshall Regional Park. This Google map is what we refer to as the Bailey Road. So if you're on Bailey Road, it's you're heading towards the strait. It's the property that's on your right. We had the grazing tenant there, Art Anderson, had a water meter in his name, which we transferred over to the Park District's name. And we have hooked up to that water meter and have added 3 new tanks for storage and some troughs. And the project on the right is the Inland Hills, kind of just a map from NRCS, their design, where that's closer on the Willow Pass side, where there is an existing well that wasn't used for a while. We have rehabilitated it. It's electrically powered pump and powered source, and that will deliver water to a number of tanks and troughs. And what this project does is it actually makes us independent of the Navy water for livestock on our property. Right now, we used to get the water from the very large tank. So between the water meter and this well, actually all of our water will now be district supplied. We also had a water project that we did last year at Garin Dry Creek. And that's also from a water meter. That's from the Stonebrae water meter. Now this grazing unit, which is leased by A&R Livestock, only had 1 trough for about 600 acres. And during the drought, and it had ponds, and between the ponds had all dried up for the drought, and there was a lot of vegetation behind that Stonebrae community. So we worked with NRCS, and the grazing tenant developed a plan and installed 3 new troughs and 2 tanks in this field, and it's done an amazing job. A&R also is the grazing tenant at Vargas Plateau. I think this is my #1 project for 2022. It's also a water meter project. Again, that water meter was in the tenant's name, transferred to our name, and the meter gravity feeds to a tank that is solar pumped up to another tank about 400 feet high. That's then pumped up with another pump, another 400 feet, and then gravity fed to about 5 troughs throughout the 1,000 acres. And that picture on the right is the day the water went in the trough. Those cows came and they were very happy. And again, this is another scenario where over the 1,000 acres, we had 3 troughs for over 1,000 acres that were spring fed and relied on ponds. But then during the drought, the springs dried and the ponds dried, and there was a lot of, there's no way to manage the vegetation. And this is, and again, we're very thoughtful about where we put things. So, we look at the grasslands and make sure that these new troughs are not installed in close proximity to trails when possible. We also did 2 pond restoration projects at Vargas Plateau. This is just a before and after. They're both for DSED projects. And they're both actually, this is a spring-fed pond. The other pond is not a spring-fed pond, but they both had California red-legged frogs and newts that were not harmed, but now they have better habitat, and it is really exciting. And again, this was completed this year, so this was done in late September. We had a number of projects with Jim Mooring out at Wildcat Regional Park. Some of it was deferred maintenance. There's unlike these other projects that we've been tapping into water meters, we rely on springs at Wildcat Canyon. It has a lot more, has a lot of spring sources there. And since 2020, we've done 3 spring rehabilitation projects, and in some cases did some trough replacement, but also added new troughs. And this year we actually were able to get water in one particular field that hasn't had water for about 5 years, that also has the Santa Cruz tar plant. And so now we'll be able to utilize and manage that unit much better with this new water availability. And I would like to say these troughs are not just utilized by cows, they're also utilized by wildlife. We have pictures of bobcats and mountain lions and golden eagles and such around these troughs. We also had a kind of a fun, interesting project at Wildcat where within the grazing unit, we had 5 treatment units that totaled 27 acres, where we brought goats in and targeted those 27 acres over a period of 30 days, specifically to reduce brush that was encroaching in the grasslands. And we're still analyzing. We have pre and post vegetation data and we need to analyze those results. But ultimately, we see a positive response. Goats definitely reduce brush. And they have opened up those inner spaces to cattle grazing. This is the picture on the right shows these cows that are kind of in one of these treatment zones. But we'll see how successful it is, in another couple of years, and if that brush starts to sprout back, or what vegetation species take its place. This also is an NRCS project. We did a project at Pleasanton Ridge, and this is the Robertson unit. So next to the Tyler, they had really no water there. And last year we completed a water project where we had about 5 troughs supplied by solar from a spring, which you see over to the left. And that's been an enormous benefit to the grazing there, because there really wasn't any water in that area. We also did a number of pond restoration projects. This is one example. This is what we referred to as Pond 22, high up on the Sinole Ridge. On the left is a picture of the pond with a lot of tules and other wetland vegetation, and it actually has a breached, let me see if I could do this. Right here, there's the berm, and the berm has been breached, so it wasn't holding water. And this is the pond a year later after it's been cleaned. We restored the spillway. Well, actually, the spillway was the same, but this whole embankment was new. So a combination of both water infrastructure and pond restoration projects to help with animal distribution across the landscape. And I also want to acknowledge Ronnie Siever, who is the grazing tenant at Pleasanton Ridge, the Robertson and Tyler grazing units. He actually recently became the grazing tenant for the Tyler just earlier this year. And he's done quite a bit of outreach activities with us. Over on the left, that's Ronnie right there with the cowboy hat, and with NRCS staff. This is the NRCS state conservationist who's in charge of NRCS at the state level. And over here on the left, this is the chief of NRCS from Washington, DC. And he wanted to come out to a project, and we brought him up to Snow Ridge, and his mind was just blown because, you know, we forget California is pretty rugged. And to have this pond on the top of a hillside, and, you know, and then he was saying, "What, you want cows in the pond, and that's good for species?" It is kind of backwards than what's ecologically done in other places. You know, our species benefit from this disturbance in habitat. But that was great for Ronnie to be there and to talk about, you know, his involvement with the program and also these conservation practices he's doing on public lands. And then on the right, we recently had a pond workshop with the Central Coast Rangeland Coalition. I'm part of the steering committee. And we had that at the Sunol Courtyard. And then for our field trip, we went up to this pond 41, and we had about 100 people there. And Ronnie, again, was a presenter. He's a panelist, and he came out in the field and, you know, facilitated the field portion. And, you know, it was really meaningful.
What is that group?
CCRC is called the Central California Rangeland Coalition.
And this is a coalition
Of rangeland practitioners, like
Yes.
livestock advisors, but it's not just rangeland emphasized. We have other people from like Elkhorn Slough that are members, wildlife biologists. And, you know, we're just a group of volunteers. Yep. And we have 2 meetings, and we happen to just showcase our pond work for the fall meeting. We also have done a number of corral improvements. Now corrals are really important because we want our tenants to handle animals safely. And, you know, some of the properties that we acquire have kind of defunct facilities. So this is an upgrade that we will do slowly over time. But we had new corrals at Mill Creek, which is Mission Peak, Delta Access, which is actually a kind of a new interim grazing unit out there at Del Val. And we'll continue to build new corrals this year at a number of different parks. And going back to the fire, you know, like I said, we're still recovering. We have a number of tenants that are still installing fence that's been burned, especially up at the Ohlone Wilderness in particular. And that's just going to take some time, but I just want to acknowledge that there's been a lot of work there, and we're also getting cost share for these projects as well through the federal, through the Farm Services Agency, because this was a federal emergency. And we also were really fortunate to have the help of our naturalists this year, especially Constance Taylor. You know, she's no longer with the district, but she really spearheaded this endeavor to go out on, I think it was 3 different separate occasions to meet with the public in the parks and talk about cattle safety, talk about why we graze in our parks. And they even set up like a scope at Brioni's, and, you know, had it on a calf, and the mom went away, and then the calf was alone. And then they talked about why the mom goes away. And then, you know, the mom came back, and I think it was really eye-opening. And I think it was very helpful because we had little to no animal incidences during the calving season in particular. And I feel like that was definitely because of the education and outreach we've been doing, not just with the naturalists, but also with public affairs. And I can't thank our partners enough. Again, the NRCS, the RCD, and also Abby Fateman at HCP. They help us with our permitting. They help us with both technical and financial assistance through our grazing tenants. And we would not be able to get this work done without their support. So I just want to acknowledge them. And also, the support that I get from stewardship. And with that, I'll take questions. Thank you.
NRCS is a state agency?
It's a federal agency.
Oh, it's a federal agency. Okay.
Mhm.
Designed to assist these type of programs.
Yes.
Federal level.
Through their EQIP program. They have a program, it's part of the Farm Bill. And it's called the Environmental Quality Improvement Program. And it provides both technical assistance and cost share assistance. So the technical side is they provide like engineering, for these pond restoration projects and our water projects to make sure that we have the right size pump, that there's enough pressure. So, we want to install things that work. So it's great to have them. It's help.
Yeah, and I've seen references to them pop up as we've had presentations on pond restoration projects and so on.
Yes, they're instrumental with the pond restoration because they hold permits. They're pretty critical to the work that we do.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Directors, Corbett or Rosario? All right, Dee, you'll go.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I got a lot out of it, even though this is my second time around. Thank you so much. It's obviously you've done a lot of work, and I just wanted to congratulate you on building the program, but also just the feeling I got from attending the grazing dinner was that you've built a nice relationship with all the grazers, and I applaud you on that and congratulate you. I think when you have that kind of relationship and it becomes more collaborative, I think, thank you so much. It really makes things a lot easier. So
Thank you.
a lot of that credit goes to you and Dina. So thank you. I just want to thank you for all your work, but there was Director Waspy brought up that East Bay Mud had all this surplus recycled water that is available. I wonder if there's any way we could use that recycled water to recharge either springs or some of these water holes. There's like hundreds of thousands of gallons available. They're making available starting now this year, every year. So if there's any, because these are out of reach, and if there's any way that we can recharge those springs or and you reuse that water, it'd be wonderful.
Right. I wonder if that water has been treated.
Been treated to a certain level, but I mean, we could probably, I mean, the question is, we should probably look at that water and see what it would take to another step of circulation, or if it just goes through some kind of ground filter, would that be enough? I know Arizona, they have recharge facilities where they recharge their aquifers that way. They have giant ponds and vegetation, and then the water spills out, and then they reuse that water. So, because Arizona has very little water, and they use every bit they can get. And then another thing, when I was in Hawaii many years ago, I need to go back. There was a Maui during a drought, but every facility that we stayed at had huge tanks with catchment systems, basically upside down umbrellas. And could we take advantage, I mean, use those in some of those areas to help keep the ponds vibrant?
That's a good question. That I would also have to defer to the wildlife biologist. So I think part of our mission is to have most of our ponds dry out during the summer. But if it was, so I think we'd want it to happen naturally. But I think in times where there's maybe like catastrophic die-offs,
Yeah,
there might be a way to mitigate that through these kind of more nuanced ideas.
Vasco Hills.
Right.
yeah.
So I wouldn't dismiss those as options. I think they're both good options. Would you like to speak, Tammy?
I think we have discussed rainwater guzzler collectors to feed, to store water for wildlife, but in some cases, treated water, if it's treated with chloramine or chlorine, it's not suitable for certain fish and amphibians. So
Ah,
we do have to consider those things, but it is an option.
great, thank you. Great program, thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank you.
Ellen, any questions or comments?
Yeah, well, I've learned quite a bit.
Mhm.
A great presentation. Do we have additional groups who would like to bring cattle to our lands, or how does that all work out? Do we have more places for irrigation that we could use, or do you know what I mean? Are we meeting the goals that we should be, or other people might want to see us meet?
Do we need more cows?
Do we need more cows? Do we need less cows? Do we need more grass? Do we? What's the
So-
story?
Yeah, it's very difficult to. I think what makes grazing a little bit more unique is that we don't really have a lot of inputs except for, these kind of fencing and infrastructure. And the tenants are held at the mercy of nature. So when it rains, how much it rains really just depicts how many cows they'll bring, or sheep for that matter. We have some sheep operators. And they already are, in a way, at moving their animals across the state of California and beyond. So, we have about 2/3 of our tenants are seasonal grazers. So they bring those cows to, the upland meadows of the Sierras, or the, irrigated pasture over in Solano County or up to Oregon. And they're not solely, we only have a few tenants that are solely dependent on our properties to graze year round. And they reduce their herds in times of drought and build back the herd in times of plenty. And I think what makes our tenants kind of unique is they have these animals that they've selected for genetics, and their demeanor to be docile animals around the public that are good moms, right? They have to be good moms. But they also need to not get skittish around dogs and bicycles and joggers and equestrians. And that it's referred to as herd knowledge. And as that knowledge is passed down to these other their babies, and we have really pleasant cows, range cows. You don't want to pet them, right? We don't want people to pet them. There's not, but they're calm, right? And they can handle all the action that happens in the parks. And that's really special. We're really fortunate to kind of have that. And and that's why we have a lot of the local ranchers, because they're also used to the kind of landscapes and such. But then they do move their animals around too. I don't know if that answers your question, Director Corbett. I'm sorry.
No, that helps me learn a little bit more. Do we, is there a need for more land for this? And I don't really know if I should be asking this question, but is this costly for us? Do we make money off of this idea? Do we, how does that work? And also seeing that obviously we've had investment in building the water tidal areas, the new water areas that we have, and we're doing more and more of those. Is that costly for us? Do we make money from that? Do you know what I
Right.
mean?
I do. So we do, our tenants do pay us for how many animals they have on the land. So we do generate revenue that fluctuates year to year based on a couple factors. We have this something called the animal unit month rate, and that number changes year to year depending on the real market. So I think historically we've gotten anywhere between 800,000 to over $1 million in revenue from the grazing program. Does it cost us money? Yes, as we have these water meters, that's going to cost us money in utilities. So, and over time, and we'll always have maintenance because there's always going to be fence that has to be replaced. And I think that as we acquire more property, it will have grazing as a component because, because grazing is really important to meet conservation goals for the park district.
So is there any issue of safety for those that are grazing because of wildcats or things like that? Do we ever have any issues? I just know because of my own experience in walking through areas and certain times of the day, watching visitors in an area which was a place where the cows were during the day, but as it's starting to get towards the end of the day, might have some other visitors.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So in certain parks, we have Tammy has spearheaded this wildlife, what is it called? The Coyote Work Group. And that's when we share information with other partners about, these kind of incidences that may happen across properties. And we can't, sometimes our tenants, certain parks have more coyotes and potentially more calf deaths related to the coyotes. Like in wildcat in particular, there's been a lot of witnesses of packs of coyotes around calves. And that's been happening, so it's not everywhere. It's very, very in particular areas, and it fluctuates year to year. So, but it's not I don't hear it a lot from the tenants. So it's a very uncommon problem and only in particular areas during certain times.
But also does the building of the new facilities for water, which has happened over the last few years, is that a huge cost for us, or does that bring in the opportunity to serve water and sell water, and how does that work?
So I think I would look at it as it's a one-time cost. So those water improvements are one-time cost, and the life expectancy of that infrastructure is about 20 to 25 years. So, when we install a trough, we don't expect that, it might have like maintenance, you might need to change a float valve or something, but, once they're in, they'll be there for, 20 plus years or more. So it's more of just a long-term improvement that will help us manage the grazing on our parks. And then when we do these projects, we're not relying on legacy infrastructure in some cases, which, we acquired from a ranch, and we're looking at it from a perspective of like what the park needs. So it gives us opportunity to, have that public lens when we install the infrastructure.
Okay. A lot of decisions have to be made over the years, though, I would imagine, to make sure things are working, right? So we have regular maintenance that's out looking at the various water areas, right? Yeah.
Yep. So the regular maintenance would be, making sure nothing's leaking, that a float valve doesn't break, but the tenants that's on that's part of their grazing license is to do this upkeep, and that's what they do now. Okay. So yeah, it's part of, once we do these big installments, then, even park ops helps with that too. You know, if they're out and, you know, something breaks and it could be, hey, it froze or a dog hit the float valve or something, or somebody toyed with it. You know, sometimes that happens as well. So yeah, there is definitely probably some increase increase in maintenance and some cost, but I think the cost is, you know, when we're doing these improvements, we're putting in the right kind of float valves to like help with the pressure. And it's just updated. It's updated and more sustainable
Okay. Now,
and efficient.
One last question. Do we see additional mountain lions in areas where watering spots are built? Do we see that to develop that or not? I'm just curious.
I don't know that question. No, I mean, I think they're pretty elusive animals.
Yes.
So the only time I heard from one tenant, they saw a mountain lion, but that was actually at a spring.
Mhm.
So it wasn't at one of these water facilities, and we don't really have cameras at a lot of the troughs. We'd get a lot of pictures of cows, right? But it would be interesting to see what other wildlife are utilizing these, because I have seen photos of mountain lions, you know, utilizing these water troughs and a number of other wildlife. But
Yes.
I can't tell you if there's more usage with the development.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Well,
Yeah.
we know there's an issue with coyotes and calves. Do we know if mountain lions are preying on calves?
No, I don't hear that as a problem for us. I think I've actually heard of pigs, honestly, that pigs actually have been known to
What?
pigs, wild
Pigs.
boars. Hmm.
Pigs
I have
attack
one
calves?
tenant that thinks the wild
Wow.
pigs have reduced their calf herd. Their calf crop is what they call it, but that's anecdotal. But actually, when I went to Hawaii just a couple weeks ago for a conference, they have a very large domestic ungulate. It's not domestic, wild ungulate issues. Well, pigs were brought by Polynesians, but they also have other deer, like access deer and ungulates that are not from there, that are just kind of roaming wildly. And they actually had said that their wild pigs have been seen and noted to reduce their calf crop. So it was eye-opening.
What conference was in Hawaii and are board members able to go to those? Saying?
Yeah, that was the California Pacific Society for Range Management meeting.
I think, it's something that would benefit board education.
Send us to DC in the middle of winter.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. Kind of piggybacking off of Director Corbett's question about it, are cattle resources enough or too much, or where that lands? And it triggered me because I remember when the Carquinez Strait fire occurred. I think, Matt, we lost 150 acres to fire between Crockett and Port Costa this year, and during the fire season. Lost. It was a significant fire, and I was touring the area, and I learned. Well, I asked the park superintendent, what did the fact that this is grazed land mitigate the fire, make it easier to put the fire out, as we know grazing does? And I was concerned because the answer was it hadn't been grazed.
Mhm.
And the reason it hadn't been grazed was, I was like, what? Apparently the tenant who would provide the grazing cattle hadn't been able to get to that area, and was ironically scheduled to be in another week to bring in the cattle. So my concern is, if we know that there is a portion of our parklands that is normally grazed and normally therefore fire threat, especially to a small community right next door like Port Costa, is mitigated, and that's not happening, how do we bring the resources together to get that done? And you might not have the answer, but it is a concern.
Yeah, I can actually speak to that.
Good.
So that was an unusual case where we had a long-term tenant move out of the state. And he actually owned, when he moved, he removed all the panels from the corral because he owned them. We did offer to buy them from him, but he had taken all the panels and the water troughs. So and then we got another tenant to come in, but then they actually had to kind of set up their own panels to bring the cattle in. So we had a little we had one usually, and this is why it's really important that we own all our own infrastructure, in particular the corrals, because with that lull, we weren't able to bring the cows in time. Now, I think that's unusual where we don't have a lot of tenants leave and we don't have a lot of tenants that own the whole corral system. But it would have been beneficial if we had owned that and wouldn't have had that little gap in time before the fire set. So,
Okay, that was unique
yeah, that was definitely unique.
and not a systematic problem. Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. I thought I had another question.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Dee.
Another question came up at the last board meeting from public comments about, is there a way for the ranchers and our operations from each park staff to mitigate the damage that the cattle do to the trails?
Oh, that was my other question. Thank you.
Mhm.
I would think there would be some way well, I've noticed that at the Lafayette Moraga staging area, there's a section that was, I forgot the term now. They've got blocks for stream crossings. And very minimal damage there where the cattle cross. But then further up where the cattle cross and it's just trail with no concrete blocks or support, it's just destroyed. So is there any way for park staff and the ranchers to coordinate to maybe as soon as it's dry enough to scrape those areas with a tractor, or even maybe plan ahead of time and maybe get a trails, creeks and pond request to do that stream crossing? I can't remember the term now, but
The hard armor water
Yeah,
crossing with the
yeah.
interlocking blocks.
yeah.
Yeah, I think I definitely think there's room for improvement when it comes to trail management and road management. And, I think it's a combination of certain areas are wet and more susceptible to muckiness.
Yeah.
And therefore, more compaction from the cattle. So I think there's ways that we can mitigate that. Although I can't speak for operations. I know that they have certain equipment that they have that they can, excuse me, work on the trails, but I don't know what that is and how much time that would involve.
Yeah. Well, Matt Grell, Chief of Stewardship. So yeah, just after the board meeting yesterday, I was talking to Steve Castile about this, and he's already thinking about this and has already been working on it. As far as buying some new implements that they can add to the green climbers and the other equipment they've got that's smaller. And he's thinking that they can, it's basically the new attachment that they would add to that equipment that they can take out and blade some of the narrow trails. And so he's thinking that like by getting a few more of these early next year can help work with staff for operations staff to go out in some of these key areas on narrow trails and help reduce some of the damage. So it's something they're starting to think about. I know that each situation is slightly different. I know with Allison talked about earlier about the Crockett area where we're doing more rotational grazing. And so, I mean, and those projects takes a few years to put into place. We are looking at those larger scale projects in some problem areas, but Steve's also looking at some other equipment that can make it easier on some of these areas before they can get out and blade the roads. Yeah. So it's something we're starting to look at.
I'm sorry, how mechanically does that work?
I'm not exactly sure because Steve was describing it to me yesterday, but I think it's similar to just how you would work with just a regular road grader. Would just have a blade that would go on the front of the smaller piece of equipment, and they can just put that blade down and then just smooth out the trail.
So you're scraping the trail where it's been pockmarked
Yeah,
by
and
cattle.
smooth. Yeah.
So that was my other question. As you began to express it, we had a thoughtful presentation by Scott Bartlebow yesterday at our board meeting. It wasn't on the agenda, so we couldn't discuss it at the time. But it did raise the issue of whether we're doing enough to counter cattle damage after rainstorms, which is a very specific topic. I know that during my term of holding this office over the last 6 years, I do regularly get email from constituents, especially Briones specifically. I guess you get the same email, complaining after rainstorm, why you let cows destroy our trails and all that. My own, what I've done in response to those emails is after the rain, I go out and look, and the park rangers there, in my mind, do a pretty good job at repairing the trails after rainstorms. They're very aware of the issue and go out and do it. And Scott may have been addressing some of the long-term impacts where we've had, dramatic rainfall, and like 2017 and the impact last year's, and perhaps even the cow damage last year's. I understand the fundamental answer to Scott was that the downsides of grazing are outweighed by the positive impact that the grazing has, that we've spent many decades studying. But it did raise the issue is if we can do more to either mitigate cattle damage to trails after the rain or in repairing. So I'm not putting you on the spot now to get into the issue, but it is one that I think Jim O'Connor indicated to me that they would respond to Scott and give more thought to it. And what you're saying is Steve is
We're thinking about it
on.
on a lot of different scales. I mean, I think we're already doing stuff at Crockett as far as moving troughs and creating the new corrals and new fencing on the large scale, but then also looking at the small scale. And again, we have 86,000 acres, so there's a lot of problem areas, but we've put a considerable effort in the last couple of years in doing more, but there's still a lot more to do. But we're aware of it and trying to look at solutions.
And Crockett is a particular problem because of the drought. I understand from
there's
park
a lot of issues.
operations out there that David Kendall, that cattle rotation issues have been impacted.
Yeah, and we had water supply issues too, and had to develop some new water sources that became very complicated. We don't necessarily have time to get into some of the detailed complications, but we've gotten a lot of new water sources there and the ability to now, with more fencing, to do more rotational grazing.
Right.
If I might add, I mean, if operations could think about specific, just like the first half mile from every staging or from every trailhead, that would go just a long way, because we all know that people, the greater majority of people maybe go in for a mile then come back. So it's kind of an access issue. So that very first section is really important.
I also would like just to add to your thought, Director Coffey, with the Crockett Hills, what we refer to as Grazing Unit 1, that tenant that I told you had left from Carquinez was also one of the grazing tenants at Crockett. And when they left, we then kind of sequestered that vacant unit with the current Crockett Hills Grazing Unit 1, which includes the majority of the bike trails. And with that, actually, that is now going to help us reduce the cattle usage in the winter time at Crockett Hills. So we had a solution. We have a solution. It is just starting to get implemented now. So by adding that, we have more of a rotation and we'll be able to rest it.
Okay, the Bicycle Council would be pleased to learn of these endeavors, so we should communicate. Lisa, you raised your hand a little earlier. I'm sorry. not get around to you until now.
Oh, no, that's okay. Good afternoon, Lisa Gorgon, acting AGM of Acquisition, Stewardship and Development. And I just wanted to, thank all the presentations today. And just Director Corbett, you had asked about value. And I just wanted to highlight when Allison was talking about the NRCS, this is just a really wonderful example of maintenance being funded by other people's money, right? So I think when Kelly Barrington was here, he would say, we need a friend of a lift station committee or, that. Well, we have a friend of grazing and in the NRCS, and that's very significant to be able to leverage the district funds to really make these improvements that are critical to keep the grazing program operating. So I wanted to just highlight that because I think it's a very special program that we're able to take advantage of with our grazing, with the grazers.
And
Nice
that
news.
trick, yeah, Ellen?
I just said nice news.
And I recall in examining the state budget that came out a few months ago, that there was a lot of money there for enhancing grazing. It was part of the allocations for wildfire mitigation from the governor. And I'm just going to assume that with that money out there specifically for grazing infrastructure, that we would be going after that.
Yeah. The NRCS cost share is, if I go back to that slide, I think we're saying we're putting $1 million into it with our district funds, and they're matching us at about almost half.
Okay, that's
So-
federal, but
That's federal. Yeah. And
there
then
is
state.
also state money out there.
Yeah, we'll
for
have
these.
to look into the state and see if it's usable on public lands in particular.
So I'm just going to presume we're going after the state money as well.
Yes,
We should do that
absolutely. More
quick.
money.
We should do that quickly before someone else gets in line before us.
Yeah.
Especially.
Yeah, well, Ellen, I mean, all year, the board has been emphasizing for the benefit of management, our willingness to put resources into grant applications and lobbying for grants and follow up to the applications and such. There's just so much out there in state and federal funding for things we do. It came up yesterday with the discussion of the intersection of 30 by 30 programs, federal and state.
Yeah.
How much is there that we will be implementing and the need to go after that funding. So I'm hoping management is putting as much resources as it can into pursuing that kind of funding. Here's just a small little, very esoteric piece of that funding is grazing infrastructure, where the state has recognized that you need to water cattle and put up some money to help rangeland operators do that. That's there. Thank you so much, Allison.
Thank you.
It's also important because if something is eating the green stuff, is maybe keeps it from burning. So
Keeps it. Yeah, I mean, that's people who complain about our cattle. I say, look, it's not only fire mitigation, it's also contributing to biodiversity. And we've spent decades studying that at the Park District.
Yeah.
And, Dr. Alvarez is now on the biodiversity 30 by 30 committee and is on top of these issues.
Yeah.
So we will move to the next agenda item, which is discussion of future committee topics. I saw the draft agenda and I asked that we put this on since it's near the end of the year for particularly for staff to tell us any ideas they have. But in particular, this was designed for our committee members to have suggestions for topics at future committee meetings next year. So at first, I'd like to open it up to Lisa or Matt, if you'd like. This list we got from Sabrina was really helpful. I'm glad Sabrina thought of doing that. We have a list of the topics that we have actually addressed at the Natural and Cultural Resources Board Committee this year, based on a work plan that we developed last year, just like we're talking about now. And it includes a couple of topics that we haven't gotten to this year that I would suspect would be put over till we don't have another committee meeting this year, right? So this will be next year, 16 and 17. It's a list of 17 topics. And it was very helpful because it triggered me into the process that we've gone through in the past. I very much wanted, both at the board level and the committee level, for board members to have a lot more input into agenda topics than has historically happened at the Park District. So this general manager is being very proactive on that level to get our input on both the board level and the committee level. And that's what I want to pursue now and with this topic. So, you know, I have some ideas. I'm sure my colleagues have some ideas about topics. You know, we're very passionate about this committee. I mean, it's quite popular. When I was trying to assign committee membership,
We fight for it.
yeah, almost everyone wanted to be on this committee. And I took myself off of all the committees except this one. I took the prerogative of the board president to put myself on this committee. But it was the only committee in which I really had a problem and had to negotiate with some of my colleagues over committee assignments. So we're very much into this committee and enjoy its work. You know, the combination of natural resource and history, because a number of us are very much into the history of this district and our parklands. So you want to kick it off, Matt, or
Yeah, would it be helpful? Sabrina has the list that she emailed. She could put it on the screen.
oh, that would be
That
great.
would then,
Yeah.
that way you could see
That would
it.
help our
Just-
audience. Sure.
Yeah.
And thank you so very much for getting that, getting that to us in time for this meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, Matt Grawl, Chief of Stewardship again. So yeah, just looking at the list, you know, I think we covered a lot of these, but several of them are kind of our ongoing topics that we typically do every year. So we'll have integrated pest management annual report. We'll certainly do that in around April, May, depending on when our meeting is scheduled there. And then we also have now another annual report that we'll be doing every year is on our free roaming cat management policy, and that's per the policy. We do it every year. So that will also be another one of our standing items that will be more in the middle of the year. I think that's around June, July, when we want to do that presentation. And then looking at the list too, the harmful algal blooms and how we're doing with managing our lakes. That's always a topic of interest. And I'm sure it'll be of interest as we approach the swim season next year. So that's something I want to talk about. And we are making some improvements in that program as far as acquiring more equipment. For that, I know it's one thing that in the budget, there's a plan for funding to get an aquatic weed harvester. And so that'll help us manage some aquatic weeds in our lakes and reduce some of those plants providing extra nutrients, but then also, those plants get in our swim areas too. So often we have to hire contractors to remove those plants or do the treatments. And now we're going to be able to do a little bit more of that in-house. So we can talk a little bit more about that. Some other topics that I know I've talked to staff about that we wanted to put on the stewardship seminar, but it wasn't quite ready, and we'll be ready at some point next year. It's just a long-term fairy shrimp study we've been doing out in East Contra Costa County, which is a very, very interesting study that Doug Bell has been leading with a team of biologists, really mapping all of those shrimp, the pools out there in the tanks and identifying, what are present and future habitat suitability modeling as part of that study. So that'll be a really interesting presentation.
For the first time this year, I actually saw them out at Vasco Hills,
Oh, wow.
Vasco
Yeah,
Caves.
and
fairy
we
shrimp,
saw
right?
some that day on the board tour too. So that was good. But so that'd be a really interesting presentation at some point. We've also been doing the vegetation monitoring and post-fire vegetation monitoring. It's something we did want to include today, but the data wasn't quite there yet, and we're still processing some of the data. So we can do the, a presentation on that, what we've seen, similar companion presentation to what Tammy and Sue did today. And then we've also been doing a lot more fine scale grassland mapping, in our parks. And I know that's something Dina recently presented on at a conference and the CNPS conference, I believe. And so that's something we could bring, and we won't be quite ready to present on that, but we just to announce, since I'm talking, we just got another big grant from CDFW to do even more grassland mapping. So it's seemingly part of 30 by 30. They're getting a lot of money. And so since we already had a partnership when we've done mapping in the past, they offered Dina a huge amount of money to do more. So around $700,000 additional grassland mapping. So that's an exciting project. I don't know that we'll be ready to present on that next year, but as I'm talking about grassland mapping, I just wanted to share that exciting news. So that we can look forward to that maybe in 24 or 25. Some of that.
Tell the GM
CDFW
to
mapping.
share that with the board.
Yeah, sure.
We always like that.
Yeah. And then the other one, other topic that comes to mind is our oak restoration work we're doing at CNPS. So we've been working with them in the East Bay Hills, and they provided $100,000. And we've been working to design a project to do more oak restoration, and we're planning to match that with our Measure FF money to develop a really nice oak restoration project within the East Bay Hills. So we'll have the site selected, and we're planning to start the planting next fall and winter. But before we do that, we'll bring it to the committee and talk to you about what's happening there, and talk about some of the areas where we're planning for this oak restoration. So those are some topics that come to mind, and happy to talk about more, hear more ideas.
Lisa?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to address that we did take off the presentation about the advisory group and process flow. And so we'll be working with Susan Shu, the new AGM over public affairs. I think she we'll want to work with her about some presentations sort of on the work that Brenda's doing to come back next year. And then also I was thinking about this, and then Brian just sent me a text because we're in real time here about to present on recreation planning in the HCP preserve lands, and the special restrictions in our efforts to preserve, on how we do it. So this was a topic managing, so I'm going to say it slower, managing
Especially for me.
managing our HCP lands for habitat and restoration and recreation. So we were lucky to have two of our staff, Neoma and Josh, present at a national conference on managing HCP lands. And I think, as we often hear, we're doing very cutting edge, great work. And so I think it was affirmed at that conference, their presentation. They had a lot of interest in what the park district is doing. So we think their presentation would be a good presentation to bring here next year.
Yeah,
Adam,
it's an
Am
important
I saying
issue.
it right? Yeah,
It's an important issue for us.
very important. And
It's a constant tension, because we as board members want to develop all this eastern land that we're opening up to the public, and it's distressing to learn how restricted it is for us. I've been going over the Vasco Hills trail use plans, and the East County is teeming with kids, young families, and we're limited to how much shade and picnic area we can add to existing fire roads. So there's a tension, and it would be good for us because we then educate our constituencies. I attended almost every meeting, every community engagement meeting in the development of the plan for the Roddy Ranch Golf Course. And at all of those meetings, we had people show up who said, "Why don't you put disc golf out there, mountain bike trails and things like that?" And it's just stuff we can't touch, and we need to be able to educate our public as well on those limitations. So I think it's a very good topic to keep bringing to us and remind us of. So should we bring it back to the committee and generate some ideas?
You want
I
to
have
start?
a number, and I'm just going to start off because another thought that you triggered is any opportunity at all to put on this committee's agenda, Brenda, you know, we really enjoy Brenda's presentations on her projects. And I'm willing to say any project rather than just focus on archives or such. But the committee was promised at one point, I want to say 3 years, you know, pre-COVID, a tour of the archive up at Trudeau. So keep that in mind. And I see on the list of items we didn't get to, Browns Island. I've been on the board six years and I've yet to see Browns Island. That would be a heck of a field trip to try to organize, but I would give some thought to it. It involves people getting on boats and going out there. But given that Browns Island is an important Audubon role that the Park District plays, and the history of it, and it's right off the coast of Pittsburgh, it would be worthy of considering at least a committee field trip of such. So, yeah.
Yeah, and our botanist, Michelle Hammond, has been working with helping there. I know there's a research permit and there's been some other surveys done by some of the rare plants on Browns Island.
Have you ever been
So
out there?
That's something we could.
I don't think any of our board has ever been out there. It's not designed for human access. It's a pure preserve.
Right.
And
That's
I understand that, but it would, you know, personally, I'd like to actually visit it someday. And with the understanding that that's quite a staff effort to arrange that. But anyway, just on my mind. So I'll look back to Director Rosario and Director Corbett for topic ideas. Matt gave us a whole handful, which sounded good.
Well, there's quite a few there, but there's more that I will think of, but just in particular, and someone's going to probably say, no, we already do that. I would really like to see more focus on us having knowledge of what native plants, grasses, flowers, etc., live or lived in areas of land that we have.
Yeah.
In some areas, obviously, we do have wildflowers now, but we have other places where we don't. And we have places maybe even when they were eaten, because we have we have our animals that we welcome onto our land that we were just talking about. But I don't understand why we don't have more overall knowledge about what plants came from what parts of the lands that we have, and that we work hard to start bringing them back to areas where they're missing. Some areas they're not, obviously, but there's no reason why we shouldn't have wild things that are from areas coming back. I just don't understand why we don't have more of that. I know we have little pieces where we'll say, okay, this is a special place where we have this and we have that. But, you know, in some of our wide open spaces, I don't understand why we don't have more native things being planted. I just see we're a little behind on some of those things. Not that that wouldn't be a whole lot of work to do to figure out where all wild plants belong, but I would really like to see more of that. And whatever we have on that, I would like to see, but I would like to see more of it. Does that make sense what I'm talking about? So planting in open areas where things did live there and could come back wild.
Yeah. Yeah, and we are looking to do more and more of that in areas of fuel management. I mean, and do more revegetation in those areas with native plants. I mean, the oak restoration project will also have a suite of native plants associated with those restorations, and we can talk about more about where some opportunities would exist. And it looks like, I think Dina may have something to add to the Wildland Vegetation Program Manager. Thoughts?
Good afternoon, Dina Robertson, Wildland Vegetation Program Manager. Thank you for the question and interest. I think there's so many native plant species in our parklands. We are so lucky to have what we have and get to manage for it and share it with the public for all of us to experience. What I'm hearing, Director Corbin, is that you would like to hear more about what we have, because there's actually just a ton of diversity in plants on the landscape. And because our park district is so huge, 150,000 acres, that has such a diversity going from the bay to the east, and the changes in the climate and the soils and the geology influences what plants you see there. So I think it could be good to add a presentation to speak to that diversity in plants for this committee. And I would be more than happy to help with that, because I'm always happy to talk about the plants that we have here.
And
Does
we
that sound
should-
like it would?
Yes, we need that information put out there, but there are areas where we don't have the native stuff and places where we do. So we need to talk more about that. What do we have where, and how can we improve that over big, large, open spaces of land where people are hiking and etc.
I would also add that a lot of the native plants, in particular in grasslands, are hidden from view, and a lot of people don't know that they're there. And sometimes you have to be there at a specific time of the year to actually see the natives, such as particular flowering annual forbs that if you miss the bloom, if you're not there right in spring or it's a drought year, maybe they don't bloom, you might assume that they're only annual grasses there, introduce European grasses and nothing else. So I think there's a lot of more hidden native plants that if you aren't looking for them, or you're not with someone that maybe is used to identifying those plants, that you miss them. So I think with grasslands, that's in particularly the case.
Yeah, but I do know exactly what you're talking about. And I know what areas you're talking about. I'm talking about areas where we have gaps of space, where we just have things that aren't native, but have taken over and have to be removed. Have to be removed. That's just my mind. But, there are places where we don't see this, which is more obvious for people to see. Everybody isn't able to hike way back into areas and see the most rare species, but some of the trails that are closer in, and maybe even over where animals are that do the cows and those sorts of things. But in any event, I'm not talking about the areas where you have done the good work and make sure that we have the native species, but the other areas. And maybe there's ways to encourage people by putting little gardens near the beginning of your way into parks, in some areas,
Thank you.
I'm not talking about the places that already look good.
Okay, those are good thoughts. Everyone's nodding. One thought that Director Corbett just triggered was that facet of grazing that really impresses me, and that is that apparently we have it down to a science as to how to graze for the promotion of native plants, and how to discourage non-native plants. For instance, there are areas where we use sheep instead of goats, and cows instead of sheep or goats, or so there is a science to grazing for native plant habitat. And I've heard that anecdotally, but it's a topic that might be added to that Director Corbett is talking about, is that science of grazing for the enhancement of native habitat.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's connections.
Director
Not-
Rosario?
Good for each other.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, definitely, there's definitely would like to have, continue to have Anthony Chabot, lead mitigation on there until it's resolved.
Yeah, that's a good point, Director. Sorry, I was thinking about that when I saw the list and I was just wondering, are we gonna have a milestone next year? We likely will be done. I'm not sure exactly. I don't have the timeline in front of me, but I know we're doing the ecological risk assessment right now. And so when we're done with that, but we are also going to probably bring it back to the committee a little bit sooner. And it may not be this committee though, on looking at what's the appropriate land use for their
Yeah.
post cleanup. And so we'll be bringing that to the board later this year, early next year with some order of magnitude costs and what are some potential land uses that can happen after their remediation. And we need to make some of those decisions now, just because it'll help inform the risk assessment and some other, the cleanup plan we're developing.
Right.
And so that will be coming to the board early in the year next year, but I'm not sure if it'll be this committee. That may come to exec committee just because
Okay.
it's such a larger decision about usage. But as far as the ongoing remediation, certainly
Cool,
when there are milestones, we'll bring them back.
excellent. And then, I would like to see an update on, what's happening with the Serpentine Prairie. I don't think we visited, I was triggered, because I was at the, Claremont Canyon Conservancy and, two young people who worked with, Lek Namanovich. They're now they're heading up the stewardship program at the Claremont Conservancy. So, that kind of triggers, oh, I haven't heard anything about the Serpentine Prairie lately and how that's doing and if we're doing anything at all.
Yeah, we've been continuing to manage it and so we could talk about that.
Yeah, and then I would like to see surveys or wildlife and vegetation surveys of projects where like the new marsh at Martin Luther King have and see what was there before, and then can we follow that progress after when it's completed, what plants and animals have returned and vice versa. I know with the Bay Point, we heard that the black rail was really after that project was completed, the black rail was just like they're everywhere. So I think that would be great, and to see what's happening with Dotson Marsh and some of those other projects, and just to follow up, see how they're doing. And then I think everything else that's on the annual list is really good. IPM always. And I just wanted to second the cultural resources. The Brenda's presentation at the grazing dinner was fabulous. It really resonated with the grazers, and so she's gotten a lot of feedback from that, and she's hopefully get some oral histories out of there. But I
was that recorded?
don't think so.
Oh, what a shame. I want
But she
to,
has the. I'm sure.
I would have gone to that dinner if I knew Brenda was presenting, because, normally that's a long drive for me.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
had I known Brenda was doing that presentation, I
Yeah,
might
we
have
could,
gone.
well, I don't know if you'll be on the committee next year, but we can bring it back. So, or we can have her redo that presentation at some point.
And then, and just, I know this is probably not the right place, but I just want to continue to advocate for, we need to have more space for the cultural resources for that program, storage, wherever that is, whether it's 11,500, I call it 11,500, the Trudeau Center, or
The archiving program.
yeah. So whatever we can do there would be very much, it's very much needed, and it should be a priority as far as, because that's our history, and we need to collect it and protect it, and for perpetuity. So,
Brenda's video on that was terrific.
oh yeah, I saw
Well, I
it.
mean, and I know it's hard, I don't want to have for train of thought, but it just really reminds me when Director Coffey said it earlier about the planned tour No, that was April of 2020 was the plan. I mean, and so,
Yeah.
and the shelter in place started in March of 2020. So that was, I mean, that when you mentioned earlier, it's like, that's such a milestone for me because that was the very beginning of the pandemic. And I'm glad we're thinking about bringing back that, you know, and maybe taking a tour over there. And I think it would help advance that conversation too. And we have had meetings over at Trudeau in the past. I mean, and I think that's what we were planning to do for that one. I don't know how easy it would be to do it in the hybrid form there, hopefully. But I mean, we could theoretically go there, do a tour of the archives, talk about the future storage needs, and then have our meeting upstairs
Yeah.
at one meeting next year. So
And I'd like to see a Native American presentation. Ana Maria Guardado can put something together with some of the area leaders. That would be wonderful.
and I'm sorry, Director Rosa,
I agree with that too.
what about Native or what?
Just having some of the leaders do a presentation of you know, where they're at, where they're from, where they're and where they're headed. Is I know there's the Moak. There's two different tribes. There's the Moak Maya, and then there's at least John, and some of them are like that, and some of them are not like that. So if we can get some of the leaders and see what, because there's been some landmark events that have happened in the Bay Area. The city of Oakland gave 5 acres of Joaquin Miller Park to the Native Americans. That could be something we could be looking at. I was thinking of having them help, possibly having them, you know, help with their program at Leona with the native plant gardens, the plants there. And maybe they could have a hand in taking care of those, or so,
Yeah.
you know, any way we can integrate Native American education and ownership, and that'd be wonderful.
Can I jump on that?
Yes.
Interrupt you? For several years, I've been mentioning this topic. We've had Native American issues on our agenda, tribal consultations, update on the Ohlone curriculum. And Matt, as you know, I've mentioned over time that I'd be interested in hearing about the plan for overall district-wide Native American interpretation. And part of that has been informed for me by, I see Brian's on the Zoom, Brian Holtz telling me about the process in which we engaged the tribes in the naming of a park, right? And what we learned from that process that the Native American community was really interested in, which was, as Director Rosario pointed out, having some quote unquote, you know, ownership in some sacred areas of access and overall interpretation throughout all the park system. And my understanding has been that was a work in progress. And it hasn't gotten to this committee yet because of that there was a lot of thought and process involved in coming to a more global plan for what we will do with Native American recognition throughout the system. So I think this is just piggybacking on that thought that when staff is ready to do that, we are very interested in that because we want to see Native American interpretation. We have certain parks where we do it thoroughly, and there are parks where we don't do it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to move toward Native American interpretation throughout the entire system and programming throughout the entire system, and then Native American tribal engagement in ways that we learned they wanted to pursue, as opposed to just naming another park. So that I wanted to jump on that as Dee mentioned it. Back to you.
That's it.
Oh.
You just put the cap on the,
Okay.
or the cherry on the top. Thank you very much. Love this committee.
Yeah,
Glad to sit in
thank you.
for Director Lane. Always happy to.
So we'll have to lobby President Waspy next year. Committee assignments. Can
Can we bribe them?
So that covered, that covered one of on my list. I'll go through mine. We talked about lake health. Director Rosario did, and you did, Matt. That was on my list. Mentioned Brown's Island and archive interest. Anything, as I said earlier, Brenda Montano. Anything, when I say anything, it's, you know, the projects that she has that's, you know, hot on her mind and important in her mind. Same thing with Doug Bell and Doc Quack. I'm very interested in what we are learning as we implement the carbonator program up in Chabot. So this new technology and its benefits. It was just fascinating to learn that, you know, this high-tech means of burning trees that we're compelled to cut down is actually reduces carbon emissions, which is hard to, you know, get a handle on when you're talking about burning wood. But it does, and the product it produces has all these potentially beneficial uses. So I think at some point next year, we will be into that project enough to have some feedback on this new technology and the fact that this is innovation and you know, something a lot of you know, from federal to state governments and local governments are going to be looking to how this is working for us. So the carbonator.
Okay.
Process the tours.
Yeah, well, we should all go see it at some point too.
And stewardship can work with the fire department to put together something at an appropriate time next year. Yeah, I mean, it's just getting up and going, so it hasn't exactly started. Well, I mean, there's a lot of site preparation, there's a lot of activities going, but we're working on getting it going. So yeah,
It's not actually there yet.
No, it's there.
The machine is
But I mean,
there. I
as
think
far as
I've
getting
seen
the whole
pictures of it.
system set up, and there's some challenges with just the site or organization. There's a lot happening.
We had to convince the state of California, which was funding this, to let us do that. It was
Yeah.
so new.
Yeah.
They were, well, why aren't you just trucking this stuff out? What is this? So
Right.
that delayed our implementing the
Yeah.
program simply because it was so new. The state of California wasn't all that familiar with it.
Yeah, and it's just a challenging site to work in because it's isolated, limited. So we're just working through some site logistics, and they're on site. I mean, and it's starting up, but it's just not in full speed operation of bringing logs in. But it's happening.
Well, it's up to you folks. At some
Yeah,
point,
no, at some point next year it'll be ready. That's
at some point you will have learned
yes.
or gotten some idea of these, whether these benefits are coming to fruition.
Yeah, and the fire department also has a consultant working on a study to look at areas for identifying the best areas to apply the material and what park uses we have. So I mean, that will be some information to share from that too, and how to reutilize the biochar within the parks.
You know, and I want to stress on all these issues that we are raising, if these are topics that staff wants to bring to another committee or staff wants to bring to the full board,
Yeah.
I'm sure we're all fine with that.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm sure and some of these may rise to that, certainly. I mean, they will, I'm sure, as we prepare for GM comments and other things next year.
Yeah. Ellen?
I just have one last one to talk about, and
Sure.
it is almost 3. I know we take a look at shoreline. I know we know that this is something we have to worry about, but I really would like us to see more focus on everything we need to do over the next few years to be ready to have the shoreline ready for as it starts to move in. You know, I mean, we talk about it, but we talk about some of the things we would do if we built in the area, say down in Alameda. But I don't know. I think we should have more focus on just overall, what are we going to do to deal with these things, and start doing it now, because the projects that are going to be impacted are going to be happening much sooner than we know. So we really have to have an overall discussion on, are we ready? Are we working on time to deal with shoreline issues and problems? We really need to make sure that's way up on the top of the list, close to fires.
Okay.
Yep.
Sea level rise.
Yeah.
Follow-up. We did get a presentation on the study that we did.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bay Trail
But what are we
Raft
gonna do?
study and then the Hayward Shoreline Master Plan. Yeah.
Yeah,
Both,
that was
yeah,
when we
both
heard
of those would be presented.
Well, that
So
was just,
follow-
that was
Yeah,
just,
no, good idea. Good idea for
I'm
follow-up.
sorry, Director Corbett, what was the last thing you said?
that was just Hayward on that one.
Yeah, Hayward and then the Bay Trail risk assessment, both those, yeah, but there are other areas, certainly.
Yeah, but we have to really focus on that. Those issues.
Yep,
They're coming
understood.
up quicker than we know. We should have a very specific list of what trails are going to be impacted and parkland, et cetera, in the next number of years, and what are we doing to deal with those issues and problems. Is that a priority list?
I don't know that it was a priority list per se. I mean, I guess that might be a question for planning more. I mean, I know there was a priority project in that Bay Trail RAP assessment, and I know, but I'm not sure how they prioritized the work after the plan was completed.
Yeah, my question would be, we should look and see what the priority is on that, because that is something that's coming up soon, sooner than we would like.
All right, we got a lot of nodding heads again, Ellen. So the last item on my list, I've expressed interest in this in the past, but for my 6 years on this board, I'm repeatedly exposed at all these meetings to the interactions, engagement this park district has with academia. Obviously, I'm kind of married to a particular academia as I wear my Cal sweatshirt. But Cal does in fact come up at almost every today, UC Berkeley lab, UC Berkeley grad students. Yesterday in 30 by 30, the networking that's Dr. Alvarez is involved in UC Berkeley was a major player, John Jarvis. Going back to the founding of this district, UC Berkeley was heavily engaged. So there's a long history with UC Berkeley. There's also heavy engagement with merit. We teach classes there. Jim O'Connor is, David Zuckerman's thinking about taking that on. He told me the other day. Yeah, I recommended him a year ago for teaching that course that Jim's been teaching. And at that point, he was too happy with retirement. Now he's thinking about, yeah, that would be interesting to do. So that's kind of fun. But obviously UC SF we've been engaged with. We've been engaged with SF State and the State College of Hayward, Cal East Bay. So there are all these academic connections we heard about today. We hear about at all these meetings, and it would be really interesting and fun, at least for me, to hear of present and past academic interactions with this park district, because it seems to me to be an extraordinary relationship that benefits us and benefits the academics. That just it doesn't exist on the municipal level, but does exist with us.
Yeah.
And it's just a thought. And
Yeah, I mean, I think we're certainly doing it all the time. And even like the stewardship seminar, we highlighted a UC student from the Shell Lab that's doing work on urban wildlife. And we're doing more with them all the time. And we just had a meeting with them about a month ago on how to refine some of their studies and our research permits too. So we issue over 100 research permits a year for people from all around universities around the area.
That alone would
Right.
fascinate me.
Right. And so, I mean, that's something that's actually easy to do. Well, I mean, the other thing we're talking about, there's just so many, it starts to blow my mind a little bit. Like, how do we condense this
yeah,
into a
and-
15-minute presentation when a lot of these could be, each one could be its own half-hour discussion. So I'm just trying to think about how
It
to,
might be so
best for you.
routine that
Yeah.
it just doesn't cross your mind that it'd be of interest.
Right.
Because
Right,
it's
right.
just, this is what we do, this is routine and
right,
all that. I'm just fascinated by it
right.
because it seems to me to be extraordinary and unique to this agency.
And they happen at all levels. Like some of the research permits are just coming in, doing something, we might get some value. But others, they come in and we ask them to submit one and partner with us. Or others, we're going to them and saying, hey, we need some help with this. We know this is your expertise. How can you, what work can you do? Or even the UC grassland study 10 years ago, we contracted with them to do that work on our property. So there's all these levels of direct contracting, partnership, and then also just more a passive providing access and then getting the results back. So. Yeah.
So, I leave it in your lap to
Yeah.
figure out how to
Yeah.
do that kind of presentation
Yeah,
and what to focus on, what not. I'm just
Yeah. I think
putting.
we may need to do both. Maybe we'll do an
putting it
overview
out
of
there.
research permit process, do maybe some focused on some of these partnership ones, and then maybe just a general overview too.
I think we have a lot
Yeah.
we'll come back to you.
Our general population, we're well known and we're real popular for all the educational programs we put on for school kids. But I don't know that we're that well known for the enormity of the academic work we do with colleges, community and Cal State and university level work. I don't think we're well known for that. And I think it would be great to educate the board more at that level. I know how much money we spend, for instance, on buses to bring urban kids into parks and for park programs and programs like the adventure cruise and how we do it. So those are school kid things. I'm well versed in that. But on the college level, it's enormous. It's historically been there since inception of this park district. And it's really good and important work that we do. And I'd like to know more myself so that I can, again, relate to our constituents.
Yeah, I think so far I've written down 28 topics. And so, but I think advancing the academic research field and as Matt said, there's so much. So we'll come back. We can.
Okay, well, that's good for half the year. We'll come
Yeah.
up for more topics to complete the. Look, we all understand that, that this is all more than staff can do. But it's just, you prioritize among this list, both your own and ours, and figure out what you can do, what you're ready to do. I've understood that there are works in progress that just haven't been brought to us, that a couple of which I've mentioned. So it's just for the purpose of being out there and planning, maybe for a couple of years. I don't know. Thank you.
We also do appreciate the opportunity to make these kind of comments and things to look at, being that we were, elected to these positions, and we hear from people all the time, and we bring these up because we see them as things that are things we should look at from time to time. And, you have all the really great ideas as well as staff, but we have a few too. So thank you.
Yeah, this is really wonderful to get this. So thank you. Thanks to Matt.
Hello, Doug.
Oh, hi, yes, Director Coffey. No, I didn't. I just wanted to chime in at the end and say, thank you for those wonderful suggestions. And I really do mirror the whole research enterprise and highlighting, UC Berkeley's input and that sort of thing. So we look forward to working on that. Thank you.
How about a session with
Go
Doug
Bears.
Bell? How about a session with Doug Bell on the Peregrine Falcon drama at UC Berkeley?
We'll need more than 15 minutes for that one.
An ongoing drama.
That's right.
Ellen?
I just said go Bears, that's all.
Go Bears, okay. Thank you. So want to move on the agenda unless?
Yeah, well, thank you. A lot to think about, but it's all exciting and all interesting, and we're happy to work on it. It's all great work. It's just oftentimes how do we refine it into a succinct thing that we can present here at this meeting and not take up 3 hours. So turn it into a full workshop, but we'll be doing more workshops too. So thank you.
Looking forward to the seminar.
Okay, next we have public comments. Sabrina, have we had requests for public comment?
There are no public comments.
Anyone in the Zoom room? Raise your hand, your Zoom hand.
I'm really disappointed that Kelly wasn't here today for this presentation. Because he could have gotten a better understanding of our grazing practices and how the number of cows really fits into our rotational aspect of treating our lands.
Well, we can refer him to the
Yeah.
link.
I'm sure he'll listen to it and he'll have some. It's okay to have ideas.
All righty. We're ready to adjourn?
Ooh, can we adjourn to acknowledge the retirement of Linda Tubbs?
All right.
Yes.
In recognition of Linda, we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for all your effort and work put into this presentation.
Thank you.
Good job.
Good afternoon.
All
See
right.
you, Ellen.